Jason, thanks. Dozens of people joined the candidates tonight, hoping to learn more before they head to the polls. Samantha Cavalli brings us their reactions. Samantha.
Well, Cammie, those who attended the public forum this evening say it helped them learn more about the mayoral candidate's stances on issues such as raising taxes, how to prevent crime, and end the drug epidemic. And the one that got the most reaction from the crowd, audio recording devices at City Hall. Before the forum, though, started, local labor leaders gathered outside for a demonstration against Weininger, wanting to highlight what they called an anti-work agenda back when he was in the state assembly. In 2011, Weininger voted for Act 10, which took away collective bargaining rights for most public employees. Now, during the forum this evening, Mayor Genrich pleaded his case regarding the audio recording devices, saying it was politically targeted. Most people we talked to said that they thought the forum was informative, and there's a lot to think about.
I think we've got two quality candidates, and I'm hoping we have a good turnout at the polls.
I thought Chad Weininger had a really good response about looking at roads differently, the philosophy of roads, how to fund roads.
Well, I already had my mind made up before I came, and that decision is reinforced.
In the state assembly, Chad Weininger voted for a huge tax cut to millionaires and billionaires at the same time that he was taking away rights from workers in this state, and that's not a record that we want as our next mayor.
Well, the common goal by all was everyone loves and cares about Green Bay, and the public wants to see it go in the right direction. So who will lead Green Bay into the future? That'll be decided at the polls April 4th. Back to you.